I learned early that being called easy was never a compliment in my family. Easy meant I didn't ask. Easy meant I adapted. Easy meant they could turn their attention elsewhere without guilt. That night, sitting alone in my townhouse in Aurora, Colorado, I stared at my phone and thought about how often that word had followed me through my life. You've always been so strong. Rachel, you don't need help like your sister does. You'll be fine. Fine had become my role. The message from my mother sat unread at the top of the screen. I already knew what it would say. Something about family. Something about being patient. Something about not making things harder than they needed to be. Before I opened it, let me be clear about one thing. The story in the video is a creative work by Revenge Sins. All characters and events are fictional, crafted to convey a humanistic message and the values of family. I wish someone had told me earlier that stories like this don't begin with money. They begin with patterns. At family dinners, my father's voice always carried the weight of finality. When he spoke, the conversation bent around him. When my sister Kayla sighed, the room rearranged itself to make space for her feelings. When I stayed quiet, no one noticed, and that silence was rewarded. My mother often smiled tightly across the table, fingers locked around her wine glass. "You're so independent," her expression seemed to say. "You understand. Understanding became my unpaid job. When I bought my house on my own." My father laughed, pride mixed with something sharper. "Guess you don't need anyone now?" No hug followed. No questions about how it felt to finally have a place that was mine. Kayla still lived at home then. Everyone talked about how fragile she was, how lost, how much pressure life put on her. I learned that strength in our family was another word for invisibility. If any part of this feels familiar, if you've ever been praised for surviving while someone else was comforted for struggling, stay with me, not because this story promises revenge, but because it tells the truth people rarely say out loud. That night, as my phone buzzed again, I realized something had shifted. My grandfather was gone. A will had been read, and for the first time, being the easy daughter was no longer an option. I tapped the screen and finally let the message load. My earliest memory of understanding the difference between my sister and me came disguised as a celebration. I was 7, sitting at the end of the kitchen table, swinging my legs while the candles on my cake burned low. The frosting was store-bought, the kind that left a waxy film on your tongue. My father glanced at his watch and announced that we should hurry so we could clean up before Kayla's nap. Across the room, Kayla's gifts from her last birthday were still stacked against the wall. Oversized boxes, bright ribbons, things that made noise. My mother leaned over and brushed crumbs from the counter. Her voice stayed gentle but firm. "You're old enough to understand, Rachel. Your sister gets overwhelmed easily." That phrase would repeat itself for years. At 9, I saved allowance money for months to buy a used bicycle from a neighbor. The tires were worn, the paint chipped, but it was mine. Kayla spotted it in the driveway and burst into tears. Her sobs pulled my parents outside within seconds. My father crouched beside her, hands on her shoulders. "It's not fair that your sister has one and you don't." I stood nearby, waiting for someone to mention the months of saving. No one did. By the next afternoon, a brand new bike appeared in the garage. Better brakes, shiny frame. My father's tone carried satisfaction. Now everyone's happy. I learned then that fairness in our house was never about effort. It was about who reacted the loudest. School made the contrast sharper. When Kayla forgot her lines at a school assembly, both my parents took the afternoon off work. When I earned a regional academic award, the certificate stayed folded in my backpack for days. One evening, after a long silence at dinner, my mother finally noticed it sticking out. Her eyes flicked over the paper. "That's nice. Honey." The plate slid toward my father instead. "Kayla's teacher called today. She's worried about her confidence. Confidence became Kayla's currency. Achievement became mine, and it bought me nothing. At family gatherings, relatives praised my maturity. Rachel never causes trouble. My father would nod approvingly, as though discipline had been his gift to me. Kayla hovered nearby, accepted hugs, accepted reassurance, accepted space. By the time I reached my teens, the rules were clear. If Kayla struggled, the family adjusted. If I struggled, I adjusted myself. That pattern didn't bruise all at once. It settled slowly, shaping how I spoke, how I asked, how I learned to disappear without leaving the room. And long before any inheritance or arguments about money, that was the real division that formed between us, one child protected from discomfort and one taught to carry it quietly. By the time I left for college, my parents spoke about my future as if it were already settled business. Not exciting, not fragile, just handled. The night I announced my scholarship, my father barely looked up from his plate. Good. Less for us to worry about. The comment landed like a closed door. My mother nodded, relief softening her face. You've always been responsible. Responsible meant invisible again. Kayla drifted through those years differently. When she dropped a class at the local community college, the house went quiet and careful. My mother lowered her voice, as if grades could hear. She's under so much pressure. My father paced the living room. Not everyone thrives in those environments. When I landed my first internship in risk compliance, the news arrived during one of Kayla's difficult weeks. My father waved it off with a half smile. That's expected of you. Then, turning to my sister, we'll figure something out. I learned to deliver good news like bad weather briefly, apologetically, without expecting anyone to stop what they were doing. After graduation, I worked long hours and saved aggressively. When I finally bought a townhouse in Aurora, Colorado, I invited my parents over. My father walked through the rooms, hands clasped behind his back, measuring something invisible. So you really don't need help anymore. The statement wasn't pride. It was a verdict. My mother adjusted a picture frame that wasn't crooked. You've always landed on your feet. Her smile felt practiced. Your sister could never do something like this on her own. Kayla watched from the doorway, eyes flickering between us. No jealousy, no congratulations, just the quiet relief of knowing the spotlight wasn't on her. Later that evening, my father leaned against the counter, voice lowered. Don't let success make you forget where you came from. I understood the warning immediately. Achievement, in our family, came with an unspoken condition. Stay small enough not to disrupt the balance. That balance required one child to be steady and one child to be held. One child to absorb pressure. One child to be protected from it. I carried that understanding into adulthood, into therapy sessions I didn't tell my parents about, into panic that surfaced only when things went quiet, into the habit of earning my place and then stepping aside. By the time my grandfather's health began to fail, I had already learned how to succeed without expecting recognition. What I hadn't learned yet was how dangerous that lesson would become when success finally collided with money. The reading took place in a quiet office that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee gone cold. Everyone sat closer than necessary, as if proximity might change what was written. My father kept his arms crossed, jaw set. My mother folded her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the attorney. Kayla leaned toward her, already bracing for something. The attorney cleared his throat and began with formalities. Names, dates, legal language that felt distant until it didn't. When my grandfather's estate came up, the room tightened. The attorney explained that the assets had been divided evenly among his children and grandchildren, following the instructions in a trust established years earlier. My name came next. Rachel Donnelly, beneficiary of one share, valued at $1,720,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Kayla's breath caught. My mother's fingers twitched. My father's expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. The attorney continued, outlining the structure. One portion held in trust, another portion liquid. The language was calm, practiced. This was not a surprise to the paper in front of him. Inside me, something loosened, not excitement, not greed, recognition. For the first time, I felt seen by someone who was no longer there. My grandfather had always spoken plainly. Fair is fair. He used to say when we played cards. He didn't raise his voice when he meant it. He didn't soften it either. The meeting ended quickly. Chairs scraped back. Polite nods followed. No one congratulated anyone. The air felt brittle. In the hallway, my father stepped closer, voice low and controlled. "This doesn't make sense." My mother glanced between us, already anxious. "Your sister needs support right now." Kayla stared at the carpet, silent. My father's tone shifted, wrapped in something that sounded like reason. "You're already established. You have a house, a career. This kind of money could ruin her." Ruin her. The word landed hard. I reminded him that the decision wasn't mine to make. The trust had been written. My grandfather had been clear. His mouth tightened. Paper doesn't always reflect intent. The comment carried weight. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. My mother reached for my arm, grip light but urgent. "Let's talk about this as a family. There's no need to rush. Rush." The irony almost made me laugh. Kayla finally looked up, eyes wide, searching my face. Not for permission, not for fairness, for safety. My father straightened, authority settling back into place. "We'll discuss this at home." The decision had already been framed. I walked out of that office knowing the will hadn't started the conflict. It had simply exposed it. The conversation waited until after dinner, when the plates were cleared and Kayla retreated to her room. My father remained at the table, fingers drumming once, twice, then stopping as if he'd decided on a tone. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly toward the end." The statement landed deliberately, framed as concern rather than accusation. My mother hovered by the sink, drying an already clean glass. "He loved all of you," she added, eyes still averted. "But love doesn't always mean equal." My chair scraped softly as I shifted. The word equal seemed to tighten my father's shoulders. "Intent matters more than numbers." He pressed. "You know that." Sean cared about outcomes. He used my grandfather's first name the way he did when asserting familiarity, ownership even. I reminded him that the trust had been written years earlier, revised carefully, reviewed by attorneys. The calm in my voice surprised even me. My father's mouth flattened. "Paper can be rigid, families can't." My mother turned, hands clasped. "Your sister is struggling. Rachel, you're stable. You always have been." Her smile tried to soften the edge. This would change her life. The implication slid between us. Mine had already been changed enough. Kayla appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension. Her eyes flicked to my father, then to me. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured, shrinking back as if the sentence cost her something. My father stood, reclaiming space. "No one is blaming you." Then, to me, "This is about responsibility." Responsibility had always been my word. He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Your share is $1,720,000. That kind of money can distort priorities. You don't need it. Need." The word echoed, old and familiar. I pointed out that the trust wasn't a gift to be rationed by need. It was an instruction. My grandfather had chosen balance. Balance would be making sure Kayla isn't left behind. My father countered. "You've always landed on your feet." My mother reached again, this time firmer. "We're asking you to consider what's right. Sign the disclaimer. Let the funds be redirected." Redirected sounded cleaner than taken. I felt the room tilt, the years compressing into this moment. Every quiet success, every swallowed complaint, all of it being tallied now as evidence against me. I declined. The word didn't come out sharp. It didn't need to. My father's expression hardened, something final settling in his eyes. Think carefully. The pause stretched. This isn't what he would have wanted. The sentence carried threat dressed as certainty. Kayla's gaze dropped to the floor. My mother's shoulders sagged, disappointment layered with relief that the conflict hadn't landed on her. I stood, steady but hollow. The decision had shifted the air in the room. Power had moved, just enough for everyone to feel it. As I left, my father's voice followed, low and unmistakable. "We'll talk again." The words weren't an invitation. They were a promise. The call came the next morning, before I had finished my coffee. My father's name lit up the screen, steady and unavoidable. I answered, already braced. I reviewed the trust documents last night. The tone was measured, almost calm, the kind he used when he believed he held all the cards. He continued without pause. "I'm listed as a co-executor. That gives me discretion over distributions." The word discretion landed with intent. I reminded him that discretion wasn't ownership. Trustees followed instructions. They didn't rewrite them. A low exhale traveled through the line. "You're thinking emotionally. I'm thinking responsibly." Responsibly. The word felt rehearsed. "Until this is resolved," he added. "I'm freezing the trust." The room seemed to narrow around me. I asked what he meant by resolved. "You sign a disclaimer of interest," he replied evenly. "You step aside. The funds are redirected where they're needed." Needed had become his favorite weapon. I pointed out that freezing the trust punished everyone involved. His response came quickly. "Temporary discomfort is sometimes necessary." Then came the part he'd been waiting to deliver. "You have 72 hours. No raised voice, no anger, just a deadline. After that," he continued, "I'll assume you've chosen conflict over family." I felt my pulse climb, but my voice stayed level. I mentioned fiduciary duty, legal obligations, the risk of overstepping authority. A short laugh slipped through. "You always were dramatic when you didn't get your way." The words struck harder than the threat. Years of restraint had been recast as entitlement. Later that afternoon, my mother called. Her voice sounded tired, stretched thin by loyalty she couldn't name. "Your father is under a lot of stress," she offered. "This is hard for him, too." I asked whether she believed freezing the trust was fair. A pause. Dishes clinked in the background. "We just want peace." Peace. Another word that never applied equally. That evening, Kayla texted. One line. "I didn't know it would get this bad." I asked whether she planned to speak up. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then returned. Dad wouldn't listen to me. The message ended there. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Not rejection, not betrayal. Something quieter, resignation. As the hours ticked by, my phone stayed close. My father didn't call again. He didn't need to. The deadline did the work for him. I imagined the version of myself he expected to emerge at the end of those 72 hours. Apologetic, reasonable, ready to sign away something that had never been meant to be bargained. That night, sleep refused to come. Not from fear of losing the money, but from the realization settling into my chest this wasn't about my sister. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about control. For the first time, I understood the cost of being the easy daughter. I had been taught that compliance was love, that resistance was cruelty. Now those lessons were being enforced with paperwork and time limits. When morning arrived, I made a decision I'd never made before. I stopped waiting for permission. The attorney's office didn't feel intimidating. That surprised me. I had expected oak desks and judgment. Instead, The woman across from me listened without interruption. Pen, still, expression unreadable. When I finished explaining the ultimatum, her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Your father is a co-executor," she acknowledged, "but that role comes with limits." Limits. The word loosened something in my chest. She laid the documents out in front of us, sliding one page forward at a time. A trust is not a suggestion. Executors don't get to freeze assets because they disagree with a beneficiary. I mentioned the deadline. 72 hours. The pressure to sign away my share. Her mouth tightened. That's not discretion. That's coercion. She explained fiduciary duty in plain terms. Executors were legally bound to act in the best interest of the trust and its beneficiaries. Personal opinions didn't qualify. Emotional leverage didn't qualify either. If he continues, she added, he risks removal. He could also be held personally liable. Personally liable. The phrase carried weight. I asked about the clause my grandfather's attorney had mentioned briefly during the reading. The one about disputes. The lawyer nodded. The no contest clause. Her finger tapped the page. Anyone who interferes with the distribution outlined here risks forfeiting their own share. The room felt very still after that. I thought of my father's confidence, the certainty with which he'd spoken about intent and responsibility. I wondered if he knew this part, or if he had assumed I never would. The attorney leaned back. "You have more leverage than you think, but timing matters." She outlined the next steps calmly. Documentation, communication through counsel, no emotional conversations, no signatures. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed. My father's name flashed again. I let it go to voicemail. Outside. I returned the call to my mother instead. Her voice came soft, cautious. "Did you talk to someone?" I confirmed that I had. A sharp inhale followed. "Rachel, involving lawyers will tear this family apart." The irony almost made me smile. The tearing had already happened. It just hadn't been acknowledged. I told her the trust couldn't be frozen legally, that threats carried consequences. Her reply came quietly. "Your father won't take this well." That was the point. Later that evening, Kayla called. Her voice wavered. "Dad's furious. He says you're trying to humiliate him." I corrected her gently. "I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was protecting myself." She hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't know he could lose everything. Neither had I. Not until now." When the call ended, I sat with the truth settling in. Knowledge hadn't erased the fear, but it had shifted the balance. For the first time, the power in this fight didn't belong solely to the person who raised his voice the loudest. The 72-hour clock was still ticking. This time, it wasn't ticking for me. My grandmother, Maureen, answered the door before I knocked. Her eyes searched my face the way they always had, as if checking for damage I might not name on my own. "Come in," she urged, already turning back toward the living room. "I was hoping you'd come." We sat across from each other, knees nearly touching. She didn't reach for my hands. She never rushed comfort. Instead, she spoke with the steadiness of someone who had waited a long time to be heard. "Your father called me this morning," she began. He wanted reassurance. The word sounded brittle in her mouth. I explained the ultimatum, the frozen trust, the deadline. Her expression didn't shift into shock. It hardened into recognition. "He tried this once before," she said quietly. The room seemed to tilt. I asked what she meant. "Years ago." She continued. "Your father asked Sean to leave everything to Kayla." Her gaze didn't waver. "He argued that you'd be fine on your own." That fairness didn't mean equality. The sentence landed like a bruise being pressed. She stood and crossed the room, returning with a slim folder. Papers rested neatly inside. She handed it to me without ceremony. Sean didn't argue. She went on. He listened. Then he changed the trust. I opened the folder with careful fingers. legal pages, notes in my grandfather's handwriting, and then, folded once, a letter addressed to me. Maureen watched as I read, Rachel. It began. You were always asked to be stronger than was fair. My throat tightened. This is not generosity. The letter continued. It is balance. I saw what others pretended not to. The words blurred for a moment. I lowered the page. My grandmother's voice softened but didn't falter. He kept clippings too. Your awards, acceptance letters, anything that showed effort. A pause. He was proud of you. Proud. The word felt unfamiliar when directed at me. I told her about the attorney, about fiduciary duty, about the no contest clause. A nod followed. Your grandfather insisted on it. Her mouth curved slightly. He said fairness without protection is just a suggestion. We sat in silence, the weight of it settling between us. Not grief, not anger, something steadier. Before I left, she touched my arm. Grip firm. Whatever happens next, she told me. Remember, this was never about money. I understood what she meant as I stepped back outside. The inheritance hadn't given me courage. It had revealed that someone had seen the imbalance long before I found the language for it. When my phone buzzed again that night, I didn't flinch. The truth was already in motion, and it wasn't alone. The final call came through my attorney a week later. The message was brief, efficient, irreversible. My father had been formally removed as co-executor. The trust would proceed exactly as written. No delays, no conditions. When my phone rang again that night, I recognized my mother's number but let it pass. Silence wasn't punishment. It was clarity. A few days later, Kayla reached out. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Dad isn't speaking to either of us now. The pause stretched. I didn't know how trapped I was until he lost control. I listened. Not to fix, not to rescue, just to hear her stand on her own words. We met for coffee the following weekend. No apologies demanded. No debts tallied. She spoke about enrolling again, about wanting to learn how to manage her own life. I watched her hands shake as she talked, then steady. Growth doesn't announce itself loudly. It happens in moments like that. At home. I arranged a small dinner. My grandmother arrived first, setting a pie on the counter with a satisfied nod. 2 cousins followed, laughter easing into the room without pretense. Kayla came last, uncertain but present. No one mentioned the trust. No one asked about money. We talked about work, about plans, about ordinary things that felt newly earned. When my grandmother raised her glass, the words were simple. To truth. It costs less than silence. I felt the meaning settle without needing explanation. Later that night, I typed a message to my parents and let it sit before sending. The words mattered, not because they would change anyone else, but because they would change me. I love you. I won't earn love by disappearing anymore. There was no follow-up. There didn't need to be. I used the inheritance carefully, paid down what remained of my loans, invested conservatively, set aside funds for therapy I once postponed and for opportunities I once told myself I didn't deserve. None of it felt like winning. It felt like alignment. What I learned surprised me. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that open only for respect. Fairness doesn't require permission. And being strong doesn't mean being silent. If this story echoes anything in your life, if you've ever been labeled easy because you learned to endure, stay with that recognition. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Support stories that remind us we're allowed to take up space without apology. The family I grew up in didn't survive my truth intact, but something better did. I sat at the table long after everyone left. The quiet no longer heavy, just honest.